54 years ago, the United Church of Canada formally recognized June 21st as the National Indian Day of Prayer, as it was known then. In 2017, the government renamed this observance to National Indigenous Peoples Day, and now in Canada, each year, the summer solstice is marked as a celebration of Indigenous language, culture, and history. It is also a day for education, truth-telling, and for those of us in the church to remember the call to action made 10 years ago in the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report to, quote, develop education strategies to ensure that congregations learn about their church's role in colonization and the history and legacy of residential schools, end quote. This ongoing education and truth-telling is vital. For as the Indigenous theologian Vine Deloria Jr. once wrote, a society that cannot remember and honor its past is in peril of losing its soul. A people that cannot remember its past is in peril of losing its soul, and so I'm going to spend a few minutes here talking about our past and a specific figure from the past that many of us will have heard of, but not all of us may know his connection to our church, even though the connection is on full display right outside the building. Born in 1803, Egerton Ryerson was an educator, author, editor, administrator, and Methodist minister. He is remembered by history as the founder of Victoria University and the leading voice in bringing free public education to Ontario. He served as a missionary with the Mississaugas of the Credit, learned their language, and had a lifelong friendship with Peter Jones, an Anishinaabe spiritual and political leader. Ryerson advocated for Indigenous children, Black children, and women to have access to education, but only for the most basic of societal roles, and within the overarching project of spreading Christendom across this land. In 1847, as the superintendent of schools for Upper Canada, Ryerson wrote an influential report on schooling for Indigenous students, where he said, quote, the North American Indian cannot be civilized or preserved in a state of civilization, including the habits of industry and sobriety, except in connection with, if not by the influence of, not only religious instruction and sentiment, but of religious feelings. Many people feel that Ryerson's report was used as the basis for the residential school system that in the decades that followed would strip Indigenous children of their language, culture, spirituality, and traditional knowledge in what the Truth and Reconciliation Commission called a cultural genocide. It should be noted that at no time did Ryerson suggest that these schools ought to be mandatory. That would come decades after his death. And although I have no way of knowing this for certain, given his personal relationships within the Indigenous community, his lifelong commitment to the education of children, and his deeply held Christian beliefs in the tradition of John Wesley, who preached, do all the good you can in all the places you can, I have to believe he would be horrified by the mistreatment, neglect, abuse, and deaths that happened in these schools that were run by churches, including what would become the United Church of Canada. As with many figures of history, the good and the bad gets mixed up together to make a complicated legacy that we who come after are left to wrestle with, and we should wrestle with it. And I would argue that we here at Metropolitan have a specific responsibility to wrestle with the legacy of Egerton Ryerson because he was one of ours. Ryerson was a leading Methodist in Toronto, and in 1868, he was part of a group of church leaders that purchased this city block. He was a trustee of this church. And as is on public display on the historical plaque outside on Queen Street, on August 24th, 1870, Egerton Ryerson laid the cornerstone of this building in an elaborate ceremony in which he was so overwhelmed with emotion that someone else had to take over and deliver his prepared remarks. We must always be cautious of judging historical figures through modern lenses, but also we must neither ignore or cancel the legacy of our ancestors, even if it makes us uncomfortable and gets us squirming in our pews. For as Vine Deloria Jr. says, a society or a church that cannot remember and honor its past is in peril of losing its soul. Indeed, it is by engaging with our history and learning the lessons of the past that we can hope to do better for the benefit of those who will come after us. We need to know where the old cornerstones are buried if we are to lay a new one, a new cornerstone with the Indigenous peoples of this land based on respect, dignity, reciprocity, and shared learning. Because many of us now believe that in order to heal and truly flourish on this land, we need to heed the wisdom of those who were here on this land before us. In her book, The Serviceberry, Abundance and Reciprocity in the Natural World, the Indigenous author and botanist Robin Wall Kimmerer talks about a malevolent supernatural being in Potawatomi culture named Wendigo. The Wendigo is a monster that suffers from the illness of taking too much and sharing too little. It is a hoarder. It is a cannibal whose hunger is never satiated, eating through the whole world. Moving from folklore to psychology, Kimmerer notes that Wendigo thinking jeopardizes the survival of the community by incentivizing individual accumulation far beyond the satisfaction of enoughness. This Wendigo thinking is akin to a consumeristic, never enough mindset that places personal short-term gratification above the health of our air, water, soil, and communities. Leading into traditional teachings, Kimmerer goes on to say, in the traditional Anishinaabe economy of the Great Lakes region, our region, the land is the source of all goods and services. Receiving a gift from the land is coupled to attached responsibilities for sharing, respect, reciprocity, and gratitude, of which you will be reminded of through community. This kind of gratitude is much more than a polite thank you. It is a recognition of indebtedness that can bring a realization that your life is nurtured from the body of Mother Earth, which is the mother to all, not just an individual. This echoes the wisdom we heard in the reflection of the Indigenous author Richard Wagamese as he talks about the now familiar phrase, all my relations, and how the most important word is all. Not just those who look like me, sing like me, dance like me, speak like me, pray like me, or behave like me, all my relations. That means every person, just as it means every rock, mineral, blade of grass, and creature. We live because everything else does. As Wagamese says, if we were to choose collectively to live that teaching, the energy of our change of consciousness would heal each one of us and heal the planet. This deep wisdom of interconnectedness is foundation to Indigenous spirituality, and I would argue, if we are being true to the teachings of Jesus, is foundational to Christianity as well, where the earliest accounts of the church were as a people that held all things in common for the building up of the common good. If you have ever looked closely at the United Church of Canada crest, you will see something very deliberate. On the arc of the crest, right next to the Mohawk translation of all my relations, is the Latin phrase, ut omnes unum sint, which is that all may be one, from the Gospel of John. All my relations, that all may be one. This is the spiritual antidote to Wendigo thinking in all its monstrous guises, from hyper-consumerism to Christian nationalism to the colonialist mindset that made the residential schools possible. If we want to lay a new cornerstone, we must lean on the wisdom of the ancestors. The ancestors like Dorcas from the book of Acts, this maker of beautiful things, we are told, and the first woman to be named as a disciple of Jesus. This woman of means who turned her back on a culture of hoarding and was guided by an ethic of care and compassion for others, especially on those on the margins of society. Dorcas's expansive love allowed her to build up a beloved community that became her family, and it was into this community of care and compassion that she was restored to life. If we are to lay a new cornerstone, we must lean on the wisdom of the ancestors. The ancestors like the great Ojibwe artist Norval Morrisseau, whose mother was Christian and father's side practiced traditional spirituality, and who believed his art could play a role in healing the rifts between the Indigenous and non-Indigenous peoples of this land. Norval knew that even if you didn't understand the stories or cosmology in his art, just by being in the presence of the colors, by encountering beauty, this had a healing effect on us. As Christians, we feel the same way about sacred space, the healing power of sacred space, which is why the collaboration between us and the estate of Norval Morrisseau to place these pieces of Indigenous art here in our place of Christian worship is so powerful, so that together we can live out a new parable of reconciliation by publicly demonstrating respect, dignity, reciprocity, and shared learning. Since this exhibit went up a year ago, in addition to the many hundreds who have come in on their own accord, we have organized 24 different groups with over 500 people coming through to see the art and the church, many of which were students. And out of this success, I'm happy to report that our board and the estate have agreed to keep the exhibit up for at least another year. Another of the TRC's calls to action was for Christian seminaries to educate ministry students about the residential schools and issues concerning Indigenous people. And 10 years ago, I took Emmanuel College's first ever course on Indigenous spirituality. It was co-taught by a man by the name of Jonathan Hamilton Diabu, who is of Mohawk heritage, and who introduced me to many of the Indigenous voices I have mentioned in today's sermon. Jonathan and I have stayed in touch, and upon hearing of the Morrisseau exhibit, he has been bringing his Emmanuel and Victoria College students here to this church, here to our church, where Egerton Ryerson laid the cornerstone to encounter the wisdom within Indigenous culture and to bear witness to how sharing sacred space can help heal that which is broken within us and amongst us, and to serve to inspire and educate those who will come after us. A photo of Jonathan and his students is on the cover of your bulletin. To this group of university students, I recall him asking, for those of you who grew up in the church, did you ever think you would see an exhibit like this? To which there was much shaking of heads. This is how we start to lay a new cornerstone. This is what that looks like. Respect, dignity, reciprocity, and shared learning. I end now with another voice Jonathan introduced me to in that class 10 years ago. Here are the words from the Indigenous writer and poet Lee Maracle. Inspired by my need to experience oneness with you, at the crest of an arc, our mutual construction in language, we are both understanding. I build my end of this arc, word by word, dream by dream. This arc becomes the meeting place of our two worlds. The desire for this arc, this meeting place, this oneness does not negate the existence of both our worlds. The arc presupposes the harmony of both, not by inviting the invasion or suppression of my world by yours. It invites sharing between them. All my relations, that all may be one. May it be so. Amen.